And with that, I think we will go ahead and get started. So we're going to start off with the Berkeley measures, and we will start first with our program director, Sophia DeWitt.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I'm going to be covering the local measures on the Berkeley ballot this November. There are 3 that EBHO has endorsed. The first is Berkeley Measure L, which is the Infrastructure and Affordable Housing Bond. This is a $650 million bond, which includes $200 million for affordable housing to support new affordable housing construction, as well as preservation of existing affordable housing. This measure is especially important because the $150 million from Measure O, which Berkeley voters passed in 2018, has already been committed to projects. Some of those projects are already in construction, some are just in the pipeline, but the Measure O money is committed, so more money for affordable housing development is needed. Local matching funds like this make projects much more competitive for state and federal tax credit financing. So this is a really wonderful opportunity for voters in Berkeley to support affordable housing and to really help ensure that projects that are being proposed do get funded, because they'll be more competitive for that state and federal financing if the local match is available through vehicles like this. The bond also includes $300 million for street improvements, including sidewalk, bike, and pedestrian infrastructure, and $150 million for other public infrastructure priorities, including improvements and enhancements to Berkeley's waterfront and underground utilities, parks, pools, and public buildings. So that's the basics of Measure L on the Berkeley ballot. Next on the Berkeley ballot, we have Berkeley Measure M, which is a vacancy tax. This is a proposal similar to something that already exists in Oakland and works well in Oakland. The measure, if it were to pass, would tax property owners who keep residential units vacant for more than 6 months in a year. The tax rate would start in the first year at $3,000 for each smaller property, non-exempt condo, duplex, or single family dwelling or townhouse, and $6,000 for other residential units in the first year. And then in subsequent years, the tax would double to $6,000 for smaller properties and $12,000 for larger properties. This tax would be estimated to affect about 700 properties in the city of Berkeley and raise between $4 million and $6 million in that first year, which would be deposited in the city's Affordable Housing Trust Fund. And that vacancy tax does exempt owners of properties with 4 or fewer units who live on their property if that's their only property. So this vacancy tax would be another source of ongoing funding for affordable housing. There is a sunset in the measure, which I believe is 10 years, and then it could be reapproved or put before the voters once again. So those are the basics of Berkeley Measure L, the infrastructure bond, and Berkeley Measure M, the vacancy tax. And I believe that my colleague Megan will be discussing Berkeley Measure N.
Thanks, Sophia. So the last of our Berkeley measures, Berkeley Measure N, was placed on the ballot by the City Council. It is an Article 34 authorization, and this would authorize any federal, state, or local public entity to develop, construct, or acquire an additional 3,000 units of low-income housing in Berkeley. Article 34 of the California Constitution requires that a city or county's voters grant approval before any public entity can develop, construct, or acquire certain types of low rent or below market rate housing projects in the city. In other words, Article 34 is a racist and classist provision of the state constitution that requires any building of affordable housing to have voter approval. This was passed in the 1950s to allow communities to veto affordable housing, and it has since contributed to a shortage of affordable housing statewide. And Berkeley citizens have voted to approve units before in 1977, 1981, 2000, and most recently 500 new units in 2016. Thanks to voter support for Measures U1 and O, the city is closer to fulfilling the previous authorization, so they must again go to the voters to approve further development of affordable housing. To be clear, this measure does not approve specific projects or commit city funds to any projects, but rather just grants general authority for projects to be developed, constructed, or acquired. So a vote yes on Measure N would allow 3,000 more units of low-income housing in Berkeley and help the city address the crises of housing affordability and homelessness. And now I'll pass it back to Jeff.
Great. Thank you to both Sophia and Megan. We do have one question from Jonathan Astman, who says, Measure L opposition seems relatively organized. I'm curious what their arguments are and how you would counter these arguments. I know there's a concern about the funds being misused or not deployed timely. How valid are these concerns? Sophia?
Sure. Thanks, Jonathan, for being here and for the question. Yes, there is an organized group against Measure L. Some of their main arguments, I think, are frankly a misreading of the measure itself. There's language that will appear on the ballot that says that there's no, I don't have it right in front of me, but that there's no guarantee of big amounts of funding. Opponents of Measure L have seized on this particular language to say that that means that the monies could go to places other than affordable housing development, and there won't be sufficient oversight. And that's simply a misreading of the measure. What that language refers to instead is that while it's anticipated that the bond will raise $650 million, you can't be completely sure of it. It's going to depend on how the market performs. And also, there's no guarantee that a specific affordable housing project will get funded. But the way that the bond measure is written is very clear that the allocations that I went over are the allocations that will be given to the various areas. So $200 million for affordable housing, and then the other breakdowns, $150 million for parks and other improvements, and $300 million for various street and pedestrian safety improvements. There will be an oversight committee that will be appointed, made up of community members from different sectors, as there was with Measure O, to make sure the monies are being allocated appropriately. Thanks for the question.
We will go ahead and move on to the Oakland measures. There are 3 housing-related measures on the Oakland ballot that EBHO is endorsing. Measure U, which is an infrastructure and housing bond. Measure V, which is amendments to Oakland's Just Cause Ordinance. And Measure Q, which is an Article 34 authorization, much like the one in Berkeley that Megan described. So let's go through these, starting with Measure U. Measure U is similar to the Measure KK bond that was passed in 2016. It's funding for both infrastructure and affordable housing. Last time, housing got a relatively small piece of the bond. This time, we have a bigger bond at $850 million, and just over 40% of it this time, $350 million, will be for affordable housing. The measure includes Article 34 authority on its own for up to 5,000 units. So if this measure passes, but the Article 34 authorization doesn't, Oakland will still have Article 34 authorization for 5,000 units. So it would ensure that we can spend this money without running into any kind of Article 34 issues. The measure in some places describes this as funds for affordable housing preservation, but the eligible uses include new construction, acquisition, or rehabilitation. So the money will be used for a mix of building new housing, rehabilitating existing housing, and acquiring existing non-assisted housing, taking it out of the private speculative market and making it permanently affordable housing. So all of those uses will be covered. The measure does not contain any specific split between individual housing programs, but both the staff and council members have indicated that the funds will be allocated in accordance with HCD, the Department of Housing and Community Development's Strategic Action Plan, which roughly divides money equally between new construction, rehab, and preservation. An important thing to note here, there is no property tax increase associated with this measure. Oakland recently adopted a policy of keeping the tax rate that people pay for property flat. So the taxes that are used to pay off the bonds for Measure U, that funds will come as existing issuances are paid off, freeing up money that people are already paying as property taxes, and as the property tax base grows. So as new property gets developed or properties turn over and get reassessed under Prop 13, that will also create more revenue to pay it. But people's tax rate will not go up in accordance with city policy. What that does mean is that the funds won't be issued all at once, but will be issued over a longer period of time. That's probably not an issue because I don't think we have the capacity to absorb $350 million in affordable housing funding all at once. But getting a lot of money up front for affordable housing will deal with the fact that we've already seen city housing funds oversubscribed. Every time the city puts out an invitation to people to apply, it gets far more applications than it has been able to fund. So this $350 million, even over a period of a number of years, will be a huge contribution that also makes Oakland projects far more competitive for tax credits and state housing funds and the ability to leverage other money. The rest of the money in this is for transportation and infrastructure, including a lot of pedestrian and bike improvements, for example. Let's move on to Measure V. Oakland's Measure V is amendments to the Just Cause Ordinance. Just to remind people, Oakland's Just Cause Ordinance was passed through an initiative to begin with, so significant amendments to Just Cause also have to go back out to the voters. When Just Cause was first passed, it only applied to units built prior to 1983. It was later amended to say units prior to 1996, but Measure V would say that projects are covered 10 years after they first get a certificate of occupancy. So new construction, as time goes by, will start to be covered by Just Cause as well. That will add quite a few units to what's covered with these tenant protections. The City Council recently passed provisions to allow for RVs and other kinds of mobile housing to be placed on private land. Measure V will extend Just Cause coverage to those kinds of mobile rental housing. Measure V also expands what is considered a just cause for eviction. Currently, one of the causes listed is refusal to sign a new lease agreement when the original lease expires. That will be removed as a just cause. So if people move into a unit and sign a one-year lease, at the end of the year, they're not obligated to sign a new lease. They can just continue on a month-to-month basis. There is a provision in the Just Cause measure that you can be evicted for occupying the unit for illegal purposes. Measure V clarifies that if the unit itself is somehow an illegal unit and didn't get permitted by the city, that is not considered use of the unit for illegal purposes. You could not be evicted just because you're not in a legal unit. There are already provisions around owner move-in and some penalties if owner evict the tenant and claim that they are moving back into a unit to occupy it as their primary residence. Measure V will add a provision that says if that happens, the original tenant would have the right to reoccupy that unit. So if an owner claims they're going to move in and either doesn't move in or moves in and then immediately moves out, the previous tenant would actually have the right to come back and reoccupy at the same rent that they were in before. There are provisions in the Just Cause Ordinance that allow people to be evicted if repairs are going to be done that require that tenants be out of the unit. Measure V will add provisions that require that tenants be given information about the code violations that are going to be addressed by that, construction work, a description of what the scope of work is going to be, and also copies of the building permit. So people would not be able to be evicted for the need to do repairs until it's absolutely clear that the owner has pulled permits and described to the tenants exactly what's being done and why. And lastly, there is a provision in Measure V to make sure that both families with kids and folks who work in the schools cannot be evicted during the school year. So if you either have a child in school or you are an employee of the school district, whether that's as a teacher or as classified staff, you cannot be evicted during the school year. Landlords would have to wait till the end of the school year to process an eviction against somebody so as not to disrupt the educational process for students. So that is Oakland's Measure V, and I'm going to now turn it back to Megan to talk about the last of the Oakland measures.
Thanks, Jeff. Oakland's Measure Q is very similar to Berkeley's Measure N. As mentioned before, Article 34 of the state constitution requires that a city or county's voters grant approval before any public entity can develop, construct, or acquire low rent or below market rate housing projects in the city. This measure in Oakland would grant approval for up to 13,000 affordable housing units within Oakland. This 13,000 number comes from the Regional Housing Needs, or RHNA, goals for affordable housing set on localities, including Oakland. Specifically, the 13,000 represents the deficit of required affordable units not produced in Oakland over the past housing element fifth cycle, which was 2015 to 2023, added with the RHNA, the Regional Housing Needs Allocation Production Goals for Oakland over the next cycle, which goes from 2023 until 2031. And additionally, as Jeff mentioned, in Measure U, the Affordable Housing and Infrastructure Bond, that also includes 5,000 units of authority through Article 34. And just once again, to be clear that this measure does not approve any specific housing projects or commit city funds to any project, but rather what this does is it grants a general authority for projects to be developed, constructed, or acquired. And to summarize, Measure Q would allow for up to 13,000 more units of low-income housing in the city of Oakland to help the city address the dual crises of housing affordability and homelessness. And I will pass it back to Jeff for our Q&A.
Great, thank you, and thanks to all of our presenters. Let's go through. We have a number of questions on the Oakland measures. Let me start with David Peters, who says, Oakland is top 10 in the country in losing Black homeowners. 15% of Oakland homeowners are below the poverty line. Half of them are cost burdened, and 40 to 50% of homeowners in many flatland neighborhoods are still Black. Why is there no exemption for low income and cost burdened homeowners, and why are the 40% of Oakland homeowners being asked to shoulder 100% of the burden? So legally, it is not possible to provide for exemptions from taxes for a bond measure. It is possible to have low income exemptions for parcel taxes, but not for bond measures. So it's legally not possible to provide that kind of an exemption. It could only be done with a parcel tax, but then parcel taxes bring in money much slower than a bond measure does. In terms of who this is falling on, this is a general property tax, general bond, and general purpose bond. So all property taxpayers will be contributing to this, not just homeowners, but owners of rental property, and more important, owners of commercial property will also be paying taxes that will go to pay for these bonds. So it is not falling just on homeowners, but all owners of real property in the city would be contributing to this. There's a second question. city attorney's summary says that bond proceeds can be used to acquire up to 5,000 rental units. This doesn't cover the racial or address the racial wealth gap, nor the root cause of housing insecurity. Why is there no provision for homeownership preservation to prevent displacement and homeownership opportunities for displaced community members? So I want to clarify that the authorization to use this money for up to 5,000 rental units is because of Article 34, which says that cities cannot provide financing or directly build assisted rental housing without an explicit authorization from the voters. There is no need for an explicit authorization to do home ownership. So this simply provides the authorization to finance rental housing. It does not in any way mean that home ownership cannot. And in fact, the city's housing preservation program, particularly its acquisition and conversion to affordable housing program, includes provisions to provide financing to assist community land trusts or co-ops to acquire existing housing and convert that to forms of community ownership. So that is covered in the bond measure. There just doesn't need to be an explicit authorization to do homeownership the way there does need to be authorization for rental housing. Let's see, from Leanna Molina, is Measure U a reauthorization of Measure K or a separate additional bond? This is a separate and additional bond. And in fact, Measure KK was also covered by a separate bond law ordinance that, at least so far, does not apply here. So this is a separate measure. And related question, if this is not an increase in property taxes, is the revenue coming from tax increment based on increase in assessed values? And let me address the comment that was in the chat too. It is city policy based on what the council has voted to not increase property taxes for debt service. It is correct that that is council policy. It's not in this bond measure itself. So there is no ironclad guarantee, but the measure is certainly going out to the voters with the representation that it will be paid for within the existing property tax burden. So the money to pay for this will come in two ways. The first is there are a number of older bond issuances out there that property taxes are being used to pay off. As that debt gets retired, the money that has been paying for those older bonds will now be freed up to pay for the bonds issued Measure U. And then the second, you're correct, as the property tax base grows, more revenue will be coming in, which will make it possible to devote money to pay off these bonds and to issue new bonds without having to increase the property tax rate on people. So it's going to come from both of those sources. We have a question on Measure V. I've heard that there's some confusion regarding the provision about recreational vehicles and mobile homes. To clarify, just cause applies to RVs on private property, not those on public right-of-way. I need to double check, but my understanding is that provision is specific to evictions from private land. And I am noting that our director, Gloria, wants to add to some of this response.
Hi, everyone. I'm so glad that you're here today. And I wanted to add just a thing or two about Measure U because there were a bunch of questions and I wanted to add to Jeff's excellent summary and some of the factual pieces with the full disclosure that I am one of the co-chairs of the Measure U campaign committee and I'm the principal officer on the campaign. So I'm a little biased in favor of this bond. So take my comments in that light. And obviously we're presenting all of these measures to you today because we have endorsed them and hope that we can get your support and the support of your friends and neighbors. I know there have been a lot of questions on both of the bonds about how is this actually going to get spent. It seems like there's wiggle room. That is largely coming from bond counsel. We can't make absolutely everything set in stone at this stage, but it's important to note that all of these bonds, including Measure U, and very explicit provisions for citizen oversight written into the measure that must be followed. And so it is being marketed and sold to the voters as something that is going to build and acquire affordable housing as well as other types of infrastructure in the city of Oakland. It can only be used for these types of, as it says in the bond measure, real property or brick and mortar infrastructure projects, as Sophia said. It cannot be used just to build up other types of staff salary. There is, of course, an administrative percentage because people actually need to carry out these programs. So you do have to provide some support to city staff to be able to do that. But really, this money has to be spent on actual hard projects. I'm an Oakland resident. I don't know how many of you on the line today are as well. I can tell you I have physically seen many streets that have been repaved in the last 5 years, a number of buildings and properties that have gone up or have been rehabilitated. And that is because of the previous bond measure KK. And I can guarantee you, having been in conversations with the Finance Committee, with Public Works at the City of Oakland, that if you want to see our libraries improve, if you want to see our parks taken care of the way that they should be, if you want to see our streets continue to get repaved, and if you most importantly want to see more affordable homes acquired, improved, and built, we need to pass this bond. I think we all agree we wish we had different ways to raise this money, but this 350 for housing and the additional 500 for other needs is going to go a long way. I want to point out that there was actually an equity analysis done that guided a lot of the investments under the last bond. So the way that, for example, streetscape and bike and pedestrian improvements happened was guided by equity principles, so that streets in the flats would and did get repair. And there's a long way to go, which is why we need more money. A number of different types of housing was funded through Measure KK. So yes, tax credit, rental, affordable housing like the one you see behind me. This is Casa Arabella down by Fruitvale BART, but also smaller projects, also acquisition and rehab of existing older housing, more unique and different innovative projects. Those were all funded by a combination of Measure KK and the County Measure A1 funds. Also, as Jeff pointed out, that Article 34 authority certainly does not limit this bond to rental projects. Affordable homeownership acquisition is possible as well. And I want to point out that with the County Measure A1, of which I sit on the Oversight Committee, that bond helped to ensure that 120 households in Alameda County who are well below 120% AMI have gotten down payment assistance and have bought their first homes because of that program. A significant percentage of those new homeowners are Black and African American because there was an equity analysis done with that as well. What I've heard from everyone in the Oakland Committee is that we are tired of these fights between should we be building innovative temporary housing for those who are unhoused? Should we be promoting wealth through homeownership? Should we be building more rental housing? The answer is yes to all of that. We cannot do all of it unless we grow the pie so we can stop fighting each other for limited resources. So I really want to make that pitch, and I'm happy offline to answer other questions on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Gloria, for all of that clarification. I think that's very helpful. Do we have any additional questions at this point? There was one early from David Peters. Why is there no right of return or preference policy for long-term residents or displaced? Oakland's affordable housing program has long had a preference for people who live or work in Oakland, and several years ago, that preference policy was expanded to include preference for people who had been displaced from their housing in Oakland. So there's already a preference policy for people who have been displaced in city programs. And then there is a last question. Can we get a schedule of bond proceeds by year, since it won't be let all at once due to the 0.22% cap? Gloria, maybe you can expand on this. We don't know yet how quickly bonds can be issued. There's a schedule for retiring existing debt. That part of it can be known, but we don't know how quickly the property tax base will grow, which will also free up revenue for the bonds. There is regular reporting on these bonds, how they're issued and what they're used for. And one more question was just posted. Where can I find the text of the preference policy? I believe it is on the city's website in the housing development portion of the Department of Housing and Community Development. We can follow up and give people information on where to find that. Let's see, another question on Measure V. Can you tell us a little more about the 10-year new construction provision of Measure V? Do we know if there's a requirement to inform tenants of those buildings once they become protected? I will double check on this, but it is my understanding that landlords are obligated to inform tenants both about the rent law if they are covered by rent adjustment as well as just cause, but we can follow up to make sure that that is the case. Thanks for raising that question. Okay, if we have no other questions on the bond measures, then let's move on to part 2 for this afternoon's presentation. I'll turn it over to Damian Scott. So Damian, take it away.
Thanks, Jeff. I'm going to share my screen with the presentation. So voting in the East Bay. So the registration deadline to get a ballot in the mail is October 24th. That's also the deadline to change up your registration. You want to change your party affiliation or your address, things like that. You can do that online or by calling 800-345-VOTE to get a paper registration form. That absolutely should be done way before the 24th, especially if your plan is to then return that registration form into the mail. I know a lot of folks, for whatever reason, can't use the online registration form, so they might fill out a paper registration form. If you do receive that close to October 24th, I would suggest returning that to the Registrar of Voters office downtown Oakland. You can actually still register up until Election Day, which is called conditional voter registration. What that is, you'll just be given a conditional ballot, and which means that the county would have to verify that you were eligible to vote and that you did register, and then they're still going to count your vote. Your vote absolutely will be counted if you were eligible to vote. That's the same all throughout the state. And for Alameda County, as well as Contra Costa County, you can find on the screen the hotlines to call if you have any questions about voter registration for your county registrar of voters. For folks on the phone or who can't see the screen, the number to call for Alameda County is 510-272-6973, and their website is acvote.org. All right. And then just continuing the mail-in voting, all registered voters in California will get a ballot in the mail. Ballots will begin to be mailed out on October the 10th, which is the same day that everyone's going to be having our candidate forums for Oakland Mayor and Alameda County Board of Supervisors District 3. Your iVote sticker will be included in the mail, as you all know. Ballots must be postmarked by Election Day if you're going to be sending your mail-in ballot back into the mail. They must be postmarked by Election Day in order to be counted by your county registrar of voters. Right. You also can return your mail-in ballot into a 24-hour ballot drop box. There's 66 of them throughout Alameda County, 35 in Contra Costa County. Starting October 10th, when you get your mail-in ballot all the way up to Election Day, November 8th at 8 p.m., your ballot be returned to one of these 24-hour ballot drop boxes. That location of all those drop boxes can be found on the County Registrar of Voters website. Okay, so since the pandemic, Alameda County moved away from the old polling place that was specific to your address and has permanently moved to the 100 voting centers. No matter where you live in the county, if you live in Berkeley, but you just so happen to be in Dublin and you just really need to return your ballot on Election Day, you absolutely can vote in all the correct races for your address at any place in the county. These voting centers are also the fully accessible voting centers. In elections past, there were specific voting centers that gave more assistance to folks who needed help voting. Every voting center is supposed to have those same access needs. Early in-person voting starts 11 days before Election Day. That information, the exact information, has not been posted to the county website as of today, but November 8th minus 11 days is October 28th. It's expected starting October 28th, you'll be able to vote early. These early voting sites will be open from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. There are some sites that are only open 4 days before the election day. So I think it's definitely important to check the county registrar of voters website or to call the county to see if that site is open 11 days before or 4 days before. Across the county, if you're going to have your address-based polling places. Okay, if you'd like to track your ballot, and if you're going to be sending it through the mail, use the website www.where'smyballot.sos.ca.gov. I know it's a mouthful. That'll tell you if it's been accepted by the county, if it's been counted, if it's been rejected for whatever reason. I also suggest folks use informed delivery service that the USPS provides for free. That way you can keep track of what mail is supposed to be coming to your house on a certain day. If it's getting past October 10th and you don't see that your ballot is on the informed delivery website, then maybe it might be time to call up your county registrar of voters to see what's going on. And if it for whatever reason got lost in the mail, you absolutely can vote in person or the 100 voting centers in Alameda County. And that's all. If you have any questions for me, definitely email me at damien@ebho.org. You also can check out registertovote.ca.gov. Also, cocovote.us for the county registrar, for Contra Costa County registrar voters, and acvote.org for the Alameda County registrar voters if you have any questions for them. All right. That's all I have, and I will send it back to Jeff.
Great. Thank you, Damien. Great information. First of all, thanks to all of our panelists, and thank you to the rest of EBHO staff behind the scene who have been monitoring the chat and letting people into the room. It takes the whole team to really put this together. Thank you to all of you for attending this. We really appreciate that there's such interest in the ballot measures. Thank you for some really great and incisive questions and comments. And then I will just encourage people to continue to look at EBHO's website at ebho.org for additional information on other election-related activities so that you can find out about candidate forums. And on that note, just thank you to everybody. We really appreciate you being here and look forward to you all voting and passing these measures on November 8th. Thank you.